Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at 10 bizarre discoveries found in waters. Coming in at number 10, we have mini Stonehenge. We all know Stonehenge. It's a cluster of large rocks in the UK arranged hundreds of years ago. But it was so long ago without any construction technology, and the structure is so large, many people are mystified as to why and how it was done. But in 2007, a group of archaeologists from Northwestern Michigan College discovered something very similar. However, this time, instead of it being in the middle of the English countryside, it was underwater. They found a structure at the bottom of Lake Michigan. There were various huge rocks, but they had no idea how they got there. One of the rocks even had a carving of a mastodon, which dates all the way back to caveman times. This suggests it's even older than Stonehenge, but scientists haven't pinned down when, how, and why this was made. Next up is Nazi nuke. In 2005, a Norwegian lake was being drained as it had to be built over. However, underneath the water, they found a Nazi nuclear bomb. Back in 1944, during World War II, Allied forces sunk a ferry going across Lake Tinna located in Norway. For decades, it was thought the ship was carrying heavy water, which is used to make nukes. However, it turned out what the Allied forces had sunk was a ship carrying an actual Nazi nuke. They thought it was just a component for a nuke, but it was the real thing. And it's a good thing they did this, as it could have been very beneficial to the Nazis otherwise. Nobody was sure really what was on the boat ever since it sank in 1944. However, the mystery was finally solved in 2005 when the lake was drained. Next up, we have Millennium Falcon. We all know the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. You know, the good guy's ship. But back in 2012, there was something very odd discovered at the bottom of an old Baltic Sea between Sweden and Finland. The object is about 200 feet in length and is a large circular shape with two struts coming out of it. They're unsure if it's man-made or naturally occurring. Nobody's sure what it is, how it was made, and when. Some say it's an alien spaceship, while others say it's a naturally formed rock. But it really does look like the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. So if there's any Star Wars super nerds out there, maybe you should dive down to the bottom of the Baltic Sea to check it out. Next up, we have undetonated bomb. So we've already seen a non-working Nazi nuke found underwater. Now that is scary, but what about finding a working bomb that has not yet been detonated? Well, at the bottom of Lake Washington in Seattle, a live World War II bomb was found. It was 11 pounds and nobody was sure how it got there. Some say an airplane may have accidentally dropped it while flying over, while others say this is some kind of military cover-up. But one thing's for sure, the guys who discovered this must have been terrified. Next up is Ghost Town. A ghost town is an old rundown place that nobody lives in anymore. They're usually pretty out of the way and aren't often seen by passers-by. However, they're usually not so out of the way that they're literally submerged in water. Well, in 1936, when officials filled Lake Buchanan, it caused the abandoned town of Bluffton to become submerged underwater. It was then forgotten about for decades. However, later in 2011, when there was a drought in the area, the town reappeared. There was no more water in the lake, so the town could be seen again. People went exploring and found old tombstones from the 1800s and even local businesses such as a two-story hotel. That's right, people really found an underwater town like Atlantis. Although hopefully Atlantis is a little more impressive than this. If Atlantis turned out to be some rundown old town, I'd be pretty annoyed to be honest. Next up is Mystery Yacht. This one is very mysterious and unexplained. A few years back, a yacht was found in the Antarctic. No one was sure what it was doing there, but things got even weirder when it was found to be from Brazil. It's a very creepy ship, and nobody is sure how and why it's in the Antarctic. There are some theories that it was wrecked in Brazil and was blown there due to strong winds. A Brazilian documentary crew actually tried to make a documentary about the ship. However, they had to cancel it due to the strong winds and dangerous sea in the area. So it looks like this ship will remain a mystery for quite a bit longer now. Next up is cars. This is a very creepy underwater find that is not only scary but solved two disappearances. In 2013, two cars were found at the bottom of Foss Lake in Oklahoma. One car was a 1969 Camaro which contained 3 people. These 3 teenagers had been reported missing since 1970. The second vehicle was a 1950 Chevy with 3 other people who were not yet identified. Police were stunned by this scary coincidence, especially as the cars were found side by side under the water. What do you think of this scary coincidence, as some say foul play must have occurred? Next up, we have massive crucifix. This is a really interesting thing found underwater. It's in Lake Michigan and is a massive 11-foot crucifix. It originated back to 1965 by an American family who bought it from an Italian marble company after their son passed away in a farming accident. It was damaged on its way from Italy to the USA and the family refused to accept it. Later, it was bought by a diving team as a memorial for divers who have passed away, and now it sits at the bottom of Lake Michigan as people travel from miles around to see it, as it's now a tourist attraction. You can actually go on a boat ride to see the cross from above in the water. Now that is one interesting history for an underwater object. Next up is treasures. Although it is interesting to find an undetonated bomb or a giant crucifix underwater, it's not something you'd exactly jump for joy about. However, after draining one river in Paris, many treasures were found. In 2016, as the Canal Saint-Martin in Paris was being drained, the drainers found 20 safes full of money. Now that is cool, but that's not all they found. They also retrieved wallets, jewelry, and cameras. They also found vehicles such as bikes and motorbikes. And even scarier treasures such as guns, rifles, and even working World War II grenades were found. The river had never been drained and was centuries old, so it had a lot of history to it. I just wish I could have been there to see the look on those drainers' faces when they found all those safes full of money. Next up is Doll's Face. We've seen some scary and dangerous things on this list, like a Nazi nuke. However, this one is more creepy than anything else. One day a guy was diving at the bottom of a lake and was diving for clams. However, under the water he found a terrifying face of a possessed looking doll. This is probably what would happen if the Annabelle doll went scuba diving. The guy was creeped out and confused as to why it was there. He posted a photo of it to Reddit and asked people what they thought it was doing there. Many said it was just a lost kid's toy, but others think there's a more sinister reason behind this. What do you think? That's 10 bizarre discoveries that scientists can't explain. High voltage syndrome. Do superpowers exist? Many say no, but this is the closest thing to a superpower you'll find to be proven by science. But while this power is proven, it's also totally unexplained. Jacqueline Priestman was a regular woman living a regular life in Manchester, England. However, after a heated argument between her and her husband Ron passed away. Ever since then, Jacqueline began noticing some unusual things happening to her. Everywhere she went, light bulbs began to burst, not just in her own home but in public too. When she plugged things into electrical outputs, they would also burst. And her vacuum cleaner also burnt out just by her touching it. She called a repairman, but he could find no reason why it had done this. This went on with many electronics for a few months, and she thought it was simply bad luck. After a while, she realized her problem needed more attention than that of a vacuum repairman. She was examined by scientists, and it was found she was accumulating a large amount of static electricity inside her. They dubbed her condition high voltage syndrome, which has so far only ever affected her. They weren't sure what the cause of this was, and all they could do was remove things like carpets that generate static electricity from her home. But despite this, her condition continued, although it was better around her home. Next up is the disappearance of Jim Gray. Disappearances always come with a sense of mystery, but what is undoubtedly the most mysterious disappearance of all time has to be that of Jim Gray. Jim Gray was a renowned computer scientist whose mother passed away one day. In 2007, he went sailing to scatter his mother's ashes near the Farallon Islands near San Francisco. He traveled on a large yacht that had an automatic position indicator should the ship ever get lost or run into danger. He was also sailing in well-populated water, and the weather was also mild with no large waves or bad wind. This sounds like the most safe trip ever. However, Gary and his boat both vanished. A massive search occurred hours after he was gone, and satellites from space took thousands of images that people looked through online. Despite the great effort, he was never found, and in 2012, 5 years after he disappeared, he was legally declared deceased. What do you think is behind the mystery of Jim Gray and his boat? Next up is dancing plague. Plagues usually involve some kind of nasty illness that spreads around a lot of people. But what if you replace that nasty illness with dancing? It sounds like some kind of fairy tale or movie, but no, in 1518, this really happened. In July of 1518, one woman began madly dancing in the streets without any music or anything. Over the space of just 1 week, this grew to over 30 people dancing, unable to stop. This went on for months, and spread to hundreds of people who were mostly women. They couldn't be talked out of it, and did nothing but dance without eating, sleeping, or even speaking. This of course caused many to pass away thanks to exhaustion, heart failures, and strokes, among other things that come from dancing non-stop. At the height of the plague, 20 people a day were lost due to dancing. The town did many things to try and stop this, including playing music and then stopping it to try and get the dancers to stop. Nothing worked until one day when the dancers were forcibly moved up to a mountaintop and were prayed for by the whole town. This miraculously worked, and the people finally stopped dancing. The weird thing is, science cannot explain this phenomena at all. Some experts suspect it was a rare form of mass hysteria caused by stress or psychosis. Others believe it was from people eating ergot, which was a popular food back in the day, but one found later to cause hallucinations. Next up is the Zodiac slab. This is one very mysterious piece of stone found in British Columbia, Canada. The stone has mysterious mythological and zodiac symbols. The slab was not found very deep in the ground, suggesting it's not that old. But then again, the engraving is hundreds, perhaps thousands of years old, making this all the more of a mystery. Some say it could have been naturally, recently buried, or perhaps purposely buried by somebody storing or hiding it. The symbols form a circle, and the rings and lines on it suggest it may have been used as a rather primitive sundial. No scientific explanation has ever been given though, as it's totally puzzling why and how this ended up here and what it is. The symbols are thought to be Greek, however it was found in Canada, so this simply makes no sense. The people who found it have tried to dig underneath it, but the government has not allowed this, so we don't know how far down this goes. What do you think this could be, and why on earth is it in Canada when it originated from ancient Greece? If I had the time, I'd like to go over there and check it out for myself. Maybe on my day off. Next up is Bimini Road. This is another underwater discovery often cited as the closest evidence of Atlantis we have today. It's found by Bimini Island in the Bahamas and is a rock formation called Bimini Road. It's not very road-like, and some say it used to be a wall that fell into the sea. It's hard to tell what it is thanks to the erosion due to the water damage. The weird thing is, scientists have no idea how old this thing is and never will. The carbon in the rocks makes all the tests wildly inaccurate, meaning the road is super mysterious. This has launched many theories about people saying it's part of Atlantis, and some say it's man-made. What do you think? Is this naturally occurring or man-made? Unfortunately, we may never know, as scientists have no way to test it, and most of the time research parties are not allowed to investigate. Next up is the DYATLOV Pass incident. This is the story of an experienced hiking group traveling to the Ural Mountains. However, despite how experienced they are, they never returned. Now that is odd, but the facts surrounding their disappearance is what's really baffling. Their campsite was found with 8 bodies still there. Some showed signs of hypothermia and others intense physical damage, including one man with brain damage but no sign of an injured skull, and one woman even had her tongue and eyes removed. It became a press event thanks to how odd this was, and was named the DYATLOV Pass incident after the expedition's leader, who was named Igor Dyatlov. There was no sign of a struggle, and their tent had been torn apart from within. The people appeared to have left willingly but weren't dressed properly, with some wearing one shoe and some wearing no shirt. One theory is that an animal or human caused this, but there are no signs of anyone or anything around them. These were experienced hikers, so it doesn't make sense why a simple trip would have turned out so bad. Next up is Maine penny. I bet you find pennies on the floor every day, but I can guarantee they are nothing like the Maine penny. This is a penny of Norwegian origin that was made back in 1076 AD. We all know that Christopher Columbus traveled to America in 1492 and was one of the first Europeans to explore it. However, this coin was discovered in Maine, USA in 1957. This means the coin arrived in America more than 400 years before Columbus. Some thought it was taken there by Norsemen, but this idea was later proved false. Others thought it was bought by Vikings trading in the 10th century, but this leaves a 400-year gap and was also dismissed. So it appears this coin got here before humans did somehow. Some say it could have been Native Americans who'd come from the northern hemisphere and traveled west. However, there are many things to disprove this, meaning no one knows how this coin got to the USA before man did. This coin continues to baffle so many scientists and experts today. It's hard to believe that one of the most amazing and unexplained things on Earth is a small coin that you might just pass by if you saw it laying on the street. Next up is the stone spears. We all know those stone spears in front of parking lots to stop cars driving off the path. Well, Costa Rica also has these stones, except the backstory to them is far more interesting and mysterious. In fact, they're one of the biggest archaeological mysteries in the world. There are over 300 of these stone spears that have been found all over Costa Rica. They're made of different types of stone and vary from being massive to small. It's not sure whether they're man-made or natural. Some say they're from Atlantis, as they appear to have some light signs of water damage. Others say treasures kept inside them, but after breaking a couple open, people found this is not the case. What do you think could be the explanation behind these stone spears all over Costa Rica? Are they man-made, a natural occurrence, or really from Atlantis? Next up is the Baltic Sea object. In 2011, the ocean diving team OceanX discovered something very bizarre. They thought it was odd, but more than odd, perhaps even out of this world. It was named the Baltic Sea object as they had no idea what it might be. The weird thing about it was, it resembles the MILLENNIUM Falcon from Star Wars. This caused some to say it's man-made, but it's much older than Star Wars and way too big to be made by man. It's over 140,000 years old, meaning this thing could have come from anywhere. There's a 300-meter trail behind it, suggesting it's crashed into the water and was going at high speeds at the time. This prompted many to call it an alien spacecraft, not only due to the looks but other factors as well. However, so far scientists have no idea what this thing is. Some say it could be part of a massive boat that fell off while the boat was sailing. However, no record of this happening has been found, and it doesn't look like part of a boat. No group has ever received enough funding to go down there and check it out. Some say this is done on purpose by the government as a cover-up, but what do you think? Next up, we have Ecuadorian treasure. We'd all love to act like Indiana Jones discovering a lost city, and inside that lost city, of course, being a healthy mix of both treasure and danger, perhaps hidden inside a structure with treasure all over the place. Well, this isn't just in the movies. You see, a few years back, a group of researchers found an undiscovered town in Ecuador. According to their research, a pile of gold treasure is hidden inside the largest building in the town. They suspected it was a mausoleum, or perhaps the famous home of the last emperor of the Incas. To get there, you have to hike through 8 hours of forest, meaning you're going to have to cut things down like Indiana. The government are keen to open the area up to the public as a tourist attraction, but this likely won't happen for a while, as researchers won't be anywhere near done researching. But why haven't they grabbed the treasure inside, you may be asking? Well, according to their research and Indiana Jones, where there's treasure, there's booby traps. Seriously, the researchers have discovered booby traps all over the place, and to disarm them could take quite a while. The 10 creepiest things ever found in woods. Girl. Unlike some of the creepy things found in the woods on this list, this was actually not found by a person, but a camera. Trail cameras are often set up in woods so hunters can track animals to shoot. But one man caught something very bizarre on his trail cam. The camera was located out in the middle of nowhere in the woods in Canada. However, in the trail cam image, you can see a little girl. Now this is already creepy enough, but one thing that makes this all the more scary is the deer. Deer always sprint away when a person comes near them, but for some reason they didn't with this girl. Some say this is proof that the girl is a ghost or spirit, otherwise the deer would have ran. How do you explain this creepy trail cam image? Next up is dolls. Like the woods, dolls are one of two things. If you used to have dolls as kids, then they were likely all cuddly and cute. But think about Annabelle or Chucky and you'll realize dolls can be creepy. Well, you may be surprised to learn that the creepiest dolls exist on a Mexican island named the Island of Dolls. It's a tradition on the island that whenever a child passes, a doll is hung from a tree. This is supposed to ease their soul and make them feel more at home. But thanks to the weather in the area, some of the dolls look creepy as they don't have heads and are all very tattered up. Since it's become so creepy, it's turned into something of a tourist attraction, which has led to a lot of people entering the forest. But this has also led to reports of people seeing dolls moving and hearing odd sounds. And many say they've seen ghosts of kids wandering around the abandoned island. Next up is clown. We already know from that ghost girl that trail cams can be seriously creepy. Sure, ghosts are creepy, but their existence is often debated. But one thing that is real and creepy are clowns. Well, one man's trail cam captured a terrifying clown wandering around. We all remember the clown phenomena back in 2016, but this isn't just some guy jumping onto the trend, as this was taken back in 2014, and it was taken in a forest in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, so he wasn't trying to scare anyone as no one was around. Another weird thing about this image is that trail cams are hidden as to not scare off animals. But somehow this man in a clown suit was able to see the hidden camera and scare whoever owned it. Was this the real Pennywise, or is there another explanation for this? Next up is final photos. This is something less sinister than a ghost or clown being found in the woods. Back in 2012, two girls named Lisanne Froon and Chris Kramers went missing. They'd got injured while hiking in the woods. After a few days of them being missing, police found something in the woods. It wasn't the girls, but they did find their camera and their cell phone. They had tried calling 911 days before, but they had no service out in the woods. But the real creepy thing was the photos found on the camera. There were many images of their surroundings, and it was thought they used it as a flashlight, or perhaps an SOS signal to show planes above they were missing. But the mysterious thing is, these girls never turned up again. Do you think they passed thanks to their injuries, or is there another mysterious explanation? Next up is behind the trees. Back in the 1980s, a guy and his friend were hiking near a canyon by some woods. They posed to take a few photos and were amazed at how quiet but huge the canyon was. One guy wanted to take a cool photo of him standing dangerously close to the canyon, so he got his friend to snap the picture. The image remained normal for 14 years, until the man scanned it onto his computer. He then zoomed in and saw something he never noticed on the small print version of the image. There was actually a white-faced man in a black cloak behind him as his friend took the image. He says he feels lucky to be alive, as the guy could have easily pushed him. He instantly called his friend who took the image, and he said he didn't see anyone else at the canyon that day. The scariest thing about this image is that the man looks very ghostly. Do you think this figure is a ghost? Next up is Creature. Back in November of 2015, a woman heard some screaming sounds outside her house. She lived next to a woods and left her house to investigate. Around the side of her house, she saw an odd half-developed creature. She snapped a picture of it and uploaded it to Facebook, and it went viral. Many people came up with their explanations, and the majority said it was an alien. This may make some sense, as that same night, military jets were seen flying overhead in the area. And as I mentioned, the woman heard a sort of screaming before she found the creature. What do you think this thing could be? Next up is pipes. UVB-76 was a broadcast center which used to broadcast bizarre transmissions. It was owned by the Russian government and was in operation from 1973 to 2010. It was a military number station and was known for coded messages and unexplained tones and buzzing. It was also known for an odd voice that would repeat the phrase UVB-76 and other odd coded messages. But back in 2012, a student named Igor Esteves found the transmission pipes and explored the abandoned base. He found documents about how to dismantle the base inside, and he also found letters saying that workers inside needed to make a quick exit. But the strangest thing he found was a modern-day electrical generator still turned on. Next up is wild children. Years ago, a tribe of wild children were found to be living in the forests of New South Wales, Australia. There were many reported sightings, but back in 2012, the police entered the forest. Inside, they found a tribe of wild kids. There were about 40 members of the tribe spanning 4 generations. They all lived in 2 caravans, 2 wooden sheds, and a few makeshift tents. All of the kids spoke their own unintelligible language and were all deformed in some way. They also behaved in odd ways, screaming and shouting and running up trees. It's a mystery if these kids were ever integrated into modern life, or how their tribe originated. Next up is Slender Man. We all know that sometimes unexplained things can be found in the woods. We all know this from watching movies and videos like this from the comfort of our own homes. But in Russia a few years back, 4 students found this out the hard way. They were walking around a wood in Russia when they decided to take a photo of them. One of them posted it to their VK profile, which is basically the Russian Facebook. But after only a few hours of it being up, one of their friends commented saying, "What's that thing in the background?" And in the background is a mysteriously tall figure. Some say it's just an odd looking tree stump, but others say this is the real life version of the Slender Man, which is a popular creepypasta. Next up is string. Now string may seem innocent and kind of mundane, but in one Japanese forest called the Lost Forest, this is not the case. It's not called the Lost Forest because the forest is lost, but because the people who in it rarely make it out. As a result, many people use string to try and find their way back out after venturing in. However, this often doesn't work, and in the Lost Forest is tons of string everywhere from people who haven't found their way out despite the string. This is yet another example of something that seems innocent being creepy. 10 secret rooms found in homes. Hidden tapes. In 2015, a man discovered a crawl space in his new home, so he decided to share it on Reddit. It was behind a large shelf and was never mentioned by the realtor before he moved in. He looked inside the crawl space and found a black locked door. He bust open the lock and inside it found a room with soundproofing all over it. And inside was just a few power outlets and a locked briefcase and a safe. Inside the briefcase he found money from all over the world, gold and silver jewelry. Now that is pretty cool, but what he found in the safe is just plain creepy. He found various tapes with no written on them. The man later bought an old tape player and saw what he called criminal activity on the tapes. He reported his find to the police, who made him delete the Reddit post, and so far there's been no new information to this find. Coming up next is the unexpected guest. How many people live in your house? This is a pretty tough question to get wrong, but for one group of college students, this is not the case. The group of Ohio University State guys who shared a house were convinced the house was haunted. They kept hearing weird noises and footsteps and would often find doors and cupboards left open when nobody was in. Now it turns out their house wasn't haunted, but the actual explanation for this is so much more terrifying. The students searched all over the house to find what they thought was a ghost. However, one roommate found a hidden cabinet that turned out to be the entrance to a secret room. Inside they found a mattress, TV, and food they had just bought, and it turned out someone was secretly living inside the house without them realizing. The students had no idea this had been going on for months and were obviously very freaked out. Next up is dungeon. We all see dungeons in movies, but what about in real life? Back in 2016, one man moved into his new apartment. It was all normal until he noticed a hidden trapdoor right next to the bathroom. He decided to enter the trapdoor and record it for Reddit, but as soon as he went down there, he wished he hadn't. He found a creepy dungeon with stone everywhere. There were odd writings with graffiti and even large beds made of stone. It really did look like somebody had been down there before he moved into the apartment. But the scariest thing the guy found under there was some churned up dirt. This suggests that something or someone may be buried underneath this hidden dungeon. Next up is every kid's dream. We've seen some creepy and scary hidden rooms on this list, but this hidden room is plain fantastic and will leave you with a smile on your face but filled with jealousy as well. When 2 parents and their baby moved house, they decided to put their newborn baby in a room which just so happened to have a secret room in it. But instead of using the secret room, they hid it from him for 4 years, placing his dresser in the way. But during those 4 years, they secretly fixed up the tiny room and made it into the ultimate secret treasure room. Then when he was 4 years old on his birthday, they revealed the secret room. They'd filled it with a map, boxes of toys, and anything a kid would ever want. The kid was jumping up and down when he saw it, and I'm sure we're now all very jealous of this kid's childhood. Next up is Singer Castle. This castle was built by the millionaire owner of the singing sewing company back in 1869, and it is now dubbed the most mysterious castle in the world. The owner was very eccentric and paranoid and would install hundreds of hidden doors going to nowhere, confusing hallways, and the house even has windows that can only be seen out of one way. There are also various passageways which remain largely unexplored as the castle is just so big. And underground, the castle has its own dungeon that many say is haunted. Would you spend a night in Singer Castle for $1,000? Next up is Fallout Bunker. Do you fear Kim Jong-un pressing a big red button? Or maybe a zombie apocalypse? Well then this house is for you. One man noticed that some parts of his basement wall came loose, and that was because it was hiding a secret fallout bunker. Inside was water, food, gas, guns, and ammo. The man who recently moved to the house was baffled and creeped out by his discovery. The person who built this shelter must either be very paranoid or know something we don't. Next up is Mystery Bookshelf. We all know the old hidden room behind the rotating bookshelf in movies. But it turns out this is not just in movies, as one American family discovered a secret passage behind the bookshelf of their parents' bedroom. Behind the bookshelf was a large metal staircase that led to a small room. But in the room was terrifying evidence that a child was living down there. There was bedding, candy, and dolls. They knew somebody had been down there recently as there was freshly peeled bananas. Also, the toys had not been bought by the family, and they had no idea how they'd got down there. After calling the police, the house was boarded up and they moved away. Next up is Underground Chapel. So far on this list, people, guns, and kids' toys have been found in secret rooms in people's homes. But imagine finding an ancient chapel underneath your own house. One family in the UK lived in a house for 6 years. However, one thing they were always curious about was a strange metal grate on the inside of their house near the front door. One day their curiosity got the better of them and they decided to pull up the grate and go down to investigate. Inside was a hidden room with bricks, shelves, and a large cross on the floor. The room was like a mix of a hidden dungeon and a chapel, and it's thought it was used as a hiding place when Henry VIII outlawed Catholics in the 16th century. Next up is Hidden Corridor. In 2005, a young couple, Jason and Kerry Brown, recently bought their first home and were eager to move in. But as they were arranging their furniture and redecorating, they found a bookshelf moved. And behind it was a secret hidden corridor. At the end of the corridor was an envelope that said, "You found it." And inside was a typed letter from the previous owner about dangerous black mold in the house. The couple were outraged, they just bought a dangerous home. They quickly moved out and sued the company who sold them the home for selling them something that could potentially harm their health. Coming up next is Trapdoor. Students usually live in squalor in tiny apartments. But one student in New Mexico was living at large in a house his parents had bought him. It was a nice, fairly large house, but he soon noticed something odd and scary happening. There was often loud banging and footsteps coming from underneath his house. The student ignored it as he assumed it would be impossible for somebody to actually be underneath his house. But one day he noticed a trapdoor in the pantry he'd never seen before. This led to a creepy underground room with a desk and recently smoked cigarettes. But no one was there, and after that he never saw anything else under the trapdoor and the noises mysteriously went away. The 10 strangest things found in people's backyards. What's in your backyard? A ball? A pool? Well, who knows, perhaps hidden in a bush or even underground there are some amazing discoveries to be found. From carrots wearing wedding rings to $1 million Ferraris, stay tuned to be amazed. But first, why not subscribe and turn on notifications too? Coming in at number 10 we have ring. Wedding rings are one of our most precious possessions, but they're also the possession which is reported to the police as missing the most. Over 100,000 Americans lose their wedding rings every year. For example, Kim Kardashian lost her diamond wedding ring in a swimming pool, but her story is nothing compared to that of a Canadian woman named Mary Grams. In 1951, her husband-to-be named Norman gave her a wedding ring. He'd been saving up for months to buy it, and Mary totally adored it. However, Mary soon lost it before their wedding, and for over a decade they had no idea where it was. Now you may be thinking if you can't find something for over a decade, then it's gone forever. But in 2017, 13 years after she lost it, she found the ring in her backyard. But that's not the interesting part. She found a carrot had grown around her ring. Mary said she likely lost it pulling a large weed out from her garden. Somehow the ring must have ended up in their vegetable patch and a carrot literally grew around it. Mary since got a replacement ring, so the couple decided to leave the ring on the carrot and leave it as a symbol of hope and love. Next up is fallout shelter. During the Cold War between the USA and the USSR, some people who feared the worst built fallout shelters on their property. But seeing as most of these were built in the early 60s, people moved from their homes and forgot all about their shelters. However, in 2017, a man named John Sims moved to a new house in Tucson, Arizona. It was all normal until he noticed something odd in the backyard. He inspected it and it turned out to be the hatch of a fallout shelter. It was made of reinforced concrete and had a fiberglass ceiling which could survive a nuclear blast. John also found various supplies, such as water and canned food. However, they were from the 1960s, so they could probably do more harm to you than a nuke could. Another fascinating thing John found under this crazy fallout bunker was a floor plan the original owner of the place had made. Some say JFK had secret nuclear shelters all over the USA for him and his family to be in, so maybe this is what John found. But no matter the history behind this place, John plans to restore it and make it into a man cave. Ah, man caves, the modern fallout shelter. Next up is Ferrari. If we dug up our backyards, we'd probably find some former house pets and some old tin cans. Of course, a wedding ring and a nuclear shelter have already been found on this list, but they're not as cool as this. In 1978, Los Angeles, California, two boys were playing in the backyard of their home digging in the mud, when all of a sudden they hit the roof of a car with their shovels. They rushed to tell their parents, who didn't believe them at first. But once they saw it, there was no mistaking that a car was buried underneath their backyard. They called in police and an excavation crew who dug up a 1974 Ferrari Dino worth $180,000 at the time. To put that into perspective, now they're worth more like $500,000. Police did some digging and found the car was stolen. You see, the criminal had stolen the car and then buried it until the heat cooled down to collect it later. But I bet they didn't expect their master plan to be foiled by two kids playing in a backyard. Next up is medieval flair. We have dangerous and scary weaponry today like pistols and nukes. But medieval weaponry is scary for a whole other reason. And what medieval instrument of pain could be scarier than the flail? In case you're too busy watching YouTube to go to history class, a flail was a giant metal spiky ball attached to a stick. Well, a few years back, a man was digging a hole in his backyard when suddenly he struck something hard. No, it wasn't a Ferrari again. This time a medieval flail was found. He posted it on Reddit and it went viral, with many people asking what on earth the man thinks it was doing there. He has no idea, but experts say this is likely from medieval times and was simply discarded there, and since then the ground has grown over it. What would you do if you found a medieval flail in your backyard? Next up is giant shell. This is one of the most astonishing discoveries in recent years. In 2015, a farmer from Buenos Aires was taking a walk around his property on New Year's Eve. The farmer named Jose Antonio Nivas wasn't expecting much when he was walking, but instead he discovered something mind-blowing. On a riverbank near his farm was a giant prehistoric armadillo shell. He immediately called in experts who said it may be the prehistoric shell of a glyptodon. Glyptodons are now extinct, but they were like huge armadillos with giant teeth. At first he thought it was a dinosaur egg, as he noticed a large hole in it. However, this may just be from wear and tear to the shell. The find was so amazing, some people said it was fake at first, but no, this is 100% real. And to top it all off, this is the only find on this list by an animal, as it was actually the farmer's dog that found it and began barking. Next up is treasure. We've seen some valuable things found in backyards already, but no matter how many Ferraris or wedding rings you find, they will never be worth more than what this couple found. One day in 2014, a couple were walking their dog around their rural Northern Californian property. Suddenly they realized something was sticking out of the ground, so they dug it up. And what they found was 1,427 Gold Rush era coins. They were buried in a chest and were all super rare collectibles. They would have amounted to less than $1,000 back then, but today these are worth $11 million. They were auctioned at the San Francisco Mint and on Amazon, with one coin selling for $15,000. The couple made an insane $11.4 million from the sale of the coins, which makes this one of the luckiest finds ever. Next up, we have 16-million-year-old fossil. Ever since he was a kid, Orange County resident Gary Johnson would love exploring the canyons around his home. And this never changed when he became an adult, because in 2014, Gary found something unbelievable near a local canyon. He thought it was a large rock at first, but later realized it was a fossil. He called an expert who said it wasn't anything special. But Gary didn't take his word for this, and worked on the fossil all summer, chipping the dirt off it with a hammer and screwdriver. And when he was done, him and his friends dislodged the 1,000-pound fossil and rolled it up the canyon into his backyard that the canyon backed onto. At first, he thought he just found an awesome fossil, but after getting an expert to come and inspect it, they discovered the fossil was between 14 and 16 million years old. It turned out to be a rare white fossil, so rare in fact it's one of only 20 on Earth. People have looked for this for decades, but Gary simply found it right by his backyard. Next up is coin. We've already had one amazing $11 million coin find on this list. Now this coin may not be worth the same amount, but the coin on its own is rarer. But it's how they found it which makes this story so hilarious. One guy needed to go to the bathroom, but he was busy in his large backyard. So he decided to take a sneaky go in the bush. However, as he was peeing, he noticed something shiny on the ground. And no, it wasn't pee. He pulled it out of the ground and saw it was a coin. After an expert came round, they determined it was a 300-year-old coin. It may not be $11 million worth of coins, but the coin on its own was valued at over $20,000. Next up is ball. We all probably have a ball in our yard, whether it be a basketball, football, or baseball. But in 2014, one Reddit user made an amazing discovery in his backyard. He found a golf ball all the way from 1899 in his backyard in the Bronx. He wasn't sure what it was at first, so he put it on Reddit, and within hours somebody had already found out the ball's patent information. This allowed him to value the ball too, and an expert said it could be worth over $14,000. This of course isn't like the rubber golf balls we know today. This type of old golf ball is called a gutty ball and was handmade by a carpenter from wood. Just imagine taking a shot so bad you can't find the ball for 150 years. Yeah, something tells me that guy never got a hole in one. Next up is Mastodon skeleton. Mastodons were ice age animals similar to mammoths but far rarer. The last bone found of a mastodon was way back in the 1940s. That was until 2016 when one Michigan man found something odd in his backyard. He thought it was the skeleton of a goat at first, but an expert came to check and even they had no idea what it was. So they called a fossil hunter who confirmed this was a skeleton of a mastodon. The man was shocked this was in his backyard, but it is an amazing find that actually helped scientists learn more about this extinct animal. 10 shocking discoveries inside people's homes. We all have a rough idea of what's inside our homes. But it's once you start snooping around attics and basements or knocking down walls for renovations that you begin to find some other things you didn't know were in your house. These are some of the most mind-blowing things found hidden in homes. In some cases, they changed the person's life for the better, but in others, they ruined the person's life. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell, and comment done for a shout out at the end of our next video. Coming in at number 10, we have Mummy. In 2013, a 10-year-old German boy named Alexander Kettler was visiting his grandma's house. He asked if he could look around his grandmother's attic, as many kids like to do. She hadn't been up there in 60 years, but said yes. When Alexander got up to the attic, he made one shocking discovery. In the attic was a real Egyptian mummy wrapped in paper inside a sarcophagus. The body wrapping was machine-made, meaning this was one wealthy and powerful person. Not only that, the hieroglyphics and the casing of the sarcophagus would make this very expensive. And I'm not talking about a few $100, I mean millions. Alexander was shocked, and you probably are too. I mean, how could an Egyptian mummy end up in an attic in Germany? Well, it's really pretty simple. The sarcophagus was bought by Alexander's grandfather as a souvenir from a trip he made to North Africa in the 50s. Now that is one amazing souvenir. The mummy is now in a museum in Hamburg, Germany, and is quite a sight to see. Next up is X. Do you plan on getting any sleep tonight? Yes? Well, now you better cancel those plans, as this will truly terrify you. Do you ever hear noises at night? It's probably nothing. But what if it's not? That was the case for one South Carolina woman named Tracy. In 2012, she heard some odd noises coming from her ceiling. She ignored it at first, as things often move around and noises are usually just nothing. But at 2:30 AM, a nail that was hammered into her ceiling fell to the floor. She sent her son up to the attic to check what was going on, and he found the most terrifying discovery ever. Inside the attic was her ex-boyfriend hiding away and spying on her. She dumped him 12 years ago as he had to go to jail, but he was released, and somewhere down the line he'd snuck into her attic and was watching her every move. He'd stayed there for 2 weeks, and police found cups of food, drink, and you know what. He'd written Tracy love letters from jail, but she'd ignored them. So the only logical explanation was to camp out in her attic like a total creep. We've all heard of clingy exes, but this is getting ridiculous. Next up is comic book. Okay, how is a comic book a shocking discovery? Sure, finding some crusty old Simpsons magazine wouldn't be an amazing find, but when David Gonzalez purchased a cheap house in Minnesota in 2010, he made quite the find. He was exploring the attic of his fixer-upper house and found some old newspaper and insulation. But within those, he found something that would make any nerd salivate. That is, the holy grail of comic books. That's right, David found Action Comics #1. The comic is special as it's super rare and is the first ever comic featuring Superman. The comic book wasn't in mint condition, but was still worth a lot of money. However, while David may be lucky finding it, he isn't that lucky. When he was showing it to his wife's aunt, she ripped it, which decreased the value of the comic by $75,000. Now that is one expensive rip. However, the comic still sold for $175,000. It's not the $250,000 it should have sold for, but it still made the price of the $10,000 house seem tiny. And to put this into perspective, a mint condition of this same comic is worth $2.6 million. Next up is skeleton. We all have skeletons in our closets, but what about in our ceilings? No? Well, check again, because there might be. One man was doing some home improvement to his house in Montreal, Canada. He was replacing the ceiling when suddenly some bones wrapped in newspaper fell from the ceiling. That might be creepy, but it gets way worse. He was baffled and instantly contacted the coroner's office. They then found the bones belonged to a child. The remains were wrapped in newspaper, which was from around 50 to 80 years ago. The house was built in 1910, and it was discovered the bones turned up there in 1978. They tried to track down the previous owners of the house to arrest them. But the records got mixed up, and they had no idea who used to live there. This terrified the neighbors, and to this day the mystery of the kids' bones is yet to be solved. Next up is Spy's Stash. If there was a secret agent living next door, you'd think you'd know about it. You might think all secret agents look like James Bond and drive Aston Martins. But back in the days of WW2, this was not the case. It turns out one family was living next to a retired secret agent who was just an unassuming old lady. However, when she passed, they had to go through her possessions as she left some things to them. But in her house, they found a stash of spy gear and gadgets. There was an SMG, classified photos, and even documents and telegrams from the Queen of England. The woman was named Eileen Burgon, and she lived to the age of 98. She'd been an agent in Spain, Germany, Africa, and Gibraltar. She was not only used in WW2, but also in the USSR vs USA era of the 1950s. It must have been a real shock to the family that their elderly neighbor was probably way cooler than them. Next up is figurine. If we found a figurine lying around the house, we wouldn't be so thrilled, especially if it was some dusty old Russian guy you'd never even heard of. But don't judge a book by its cover, as this could be the best thing that's ever happened to you. George Davis worked for an art gallery in New York. A few years back, he was cleaning his attic of his upstate home when he found something strange. There was a wooden box, and inside, a Russian figurine. Some people wouldn't care much about this, but as George was interested in art, he got it checked out. It turned out to be stored in the attic for 70 years undiscovered. It was a figurine commissioned by Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia. The figure had golden parts and sapphires for eyes, so yeah, this is one expensive figurine. The figurine was made in 1912, which obviously makes it an antique too. Believe it or not, this piece was initially valued at $800,000. However, it was taken to an auction, and as so many people wanted it, it was sold for an insane $5.2 million. Be right back, guys, I'm gonna go check my attic. Oh, okay, I'm back. It was just my ex-girlfriend up there. Next up is cash. What's better than finding some money on the street? I don't know about you, but I still get excited finding $20 on the street. But what about finding a lot more than that in your own house? A few years ago, Josh Ferrin of Bountiful, Utah, great name, closed the deal on his first home. He then drove to see it and check out all the rooms in more detail. While he was looking around in the garage, he noticed the ceiling tile was loose and some carpet was sticking out of it. He thought it would make a great cubbyhole for his kids to play in and for him to store stuff in, so he grabbed a ladder. However, inside he found ammunition cases from WW2. But this was not left behind by an elderly spy. Inside the ammunition case is what's so amazing. Inside the boxes were $45,000 in rolled up cash. He thought about all the awesome stuff he could do with $45,000. But he then realized he was a good guy and needed to set a great example for his kids. He amazingly tracked down the sons of the guy who used to live there. He then returned the money to its rightful owner, despite him being able to do a ton of stuff with the money. I sure hope that son cut him in with a reward for his honesty. Next up is masterpiece. Even if you know nothing about art, there's a few famous painters we all know. These include Monet, Picasso, and of course Vincent van Gogh. He was known for his amazing paintings, which sell for hundreds of millions of dollars today. In 2013, a Norwegian man found in his attic a painting that looked like one of Vincent van Gogh's. However, when he looked it up, he found nothing about it, and it wasn't signed. Thanks to this, he assumed it was a fake. But, just to be on the safe side, he contacted the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam to check it out. They thought it was fake too, but after 2 years of x-rays, research, and chemical testing, they found out this was real. The painting was named The Sunset at Montmajour and spent 100 years out of public view. But this is now a famous painting which can be seen in many museums. This shocking discovery inside a home is any art lover's dream. Van Gogh only sold one painting when he was alive, but now they go for millions. And no doubt, The Sunset at Montmajour is no exception. Next up, we have MLK tapes. We all know the black activist Martin Luther King Jr. He's one of the most famous speakers and activists of all time, and many credit him for black people having better rights in America and across the world today. He also had one of the most famous speeches of all time, that being I Have a Dream. One day in an attic in Tennessee, a man named Stephen Toll was going through some of his dad's old boxes. Inside he found a tape, so he decided to play it. And it turned out to be a lost tape of MLK talking about the importance of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. His father was an insurance salesman who always wanted to write a book about the civil rights movement. In 1960, he interviewed MLK for the book, but he never got around to writing it or sharing the tape. So this was a never-before-heard lost tape of MLK which provided some really interesting insights into MLK's views. This is a fascinating piece of history that was locked away for nearly 40 years. But thanks to Stephen's awesome discovery, now the world can hear more words from one of the most inspirational men to ever live. Next up, we have violin. In 2014, a top violinist from the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra named Frank Armand was walking to his car after a performance. Suddenly, a man ran up to him and tased him and then stole his violin. However, they made one big mistake in leaving the taser. Police were able to use this taser to track the criminal down. This led them to the attic of a house on the east side of Milwaukee. Thankfully, they found the violin hidden in the attic. Frank Armand then decided to take out insurance on the violin, so he had to get it valued. But I doubt he paid that insurance bill, as the violin turned out to be worth over $5 million. It turned out to be an old Stradivarius violin, which were always worth a ton of money. Meaning, of course, the police found a $5 million violin in a thief's attic. I bet the thief had no idea what he just tried to steal. One thing's safe to say, Frank Armand is one lucky man. Check out the poll in the top right corner and you can vote for the most shocking discovery. But as always, thanks for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Top 10s.